Hachiko the dog and his owner had a routine. In the morning, Professor Hidezaburo Ueno said goodbye to Hachiko and went to work in Tokyo. And in the evening, Hachiko waited patiently at the train station for Ueno to return. But one day in May 1925, Ueno died suddenly at work. When Hachiko showed up at the train station that night, he waited futilely for Ueno to come home. Loyal to the end, Hachiko returned to the train station every night. Until his death nearly 10 years later, he waited for his owner day in and day out. Then, Hachiko was cremated and his ashes were placed next to Ueno's grave, uniting them at long last. The first battle of the Civil War took place in Manassas, Virginia on July 21, 1861, on the farm of a man named Wilmer McLean. McLean supported the Confederacy but later fled with his family to Appomattox, Virginia. He stated that he hoped to never see another soldier again. However, McLean could not outrun the war. 4 years later, as the war was coming to an end, Confederate General Robert E. Lee sent his men to find an appropriate place for him to meet with Union General Ulysses S. Grant in order to surrender, and they chose McLean's new house. So, on April 9, 1865, the Confederacy officially surrendered to the Union in McLean's parlor. This led one Confederate soldier to quip that McLean was perhaps the only man who ever had the first major pitched battle of a war fought in his front yard and the surrender signed 4 years later in his parlor. On September 22, 1975, a U.S. veteran named Oliver Sipple saved the life of President Gerald Ford. While out for his morning walk, Sipple saw a woman named Sarah Jane Moore point a gun at the president. He quickly lunged toward her and saved Ford's life. But in the aftermath, the American media outed Sipple as a gay man. Sipple, who was not out, said that the unwanted disclosure had caused him great mental anguish, embarrassment, and humiliation. His family abandoned him, society ostracized him, and Ford barely acknowledged Sipple's heroism. As a result, Sipple slid into a deep depression. He died at the age of 47, alone, in 1989. Tales of the Wild West are routinely populated with stories of white cowboys, sheriffs, and outlaws. But a black postal worker named Mary Fields deserves a place in the annals of the Wild West. Called Stagecoach Mary, this fearless gunslinger was the first black postwoman in the United States. Born into slavery, Fields found freedom after the Civil War and started delivering mail. She routinely drove 300 miles by stagecoach for her job. Along the way, Fields developed a reputation for her temper like a grizzly bear, and for her claim that she could knock out any man with a single punch. Before long, the mayor of Cascade, Montana, declared that Fields could drink at the local saloon, making her the only woman allowed there who was not a prostitute. The all-black 369th Infantry Regiment of the New York Army National Guard called themselves the Black Rattlers. The French called them Men of Bronze, but the Germans called this fearsome fighting unit the Harlem Hellfighters, and that's the name that stuck. For 191 days, longer than any unit, the Harlem Hellfighters proved themselves on the battlefields of World War I. Stories of their bravery spread around the world, and soldiers like Henry Johnson came home as heroes. However, despite the historical facts that make their tale amazing, their legacy has been sadly overlooked. And although many Hellfighters hoped that their service would improve race relations at home, they returned to the United States to find racist Jim Crow laws still in place. Between 11,000 and 12,000 years ago, early humans descended on a site in present-day Turkey and started to build a temple. But the passing centuries obscured their work, and the meaning behind it. In fact, it wasn't until 1994 that anyone stumbled across the so-called Göbekli Tepe, which is Turkish for Belly Hill. Then, archaeologists were stunned to find a sprawling ancient temple so old that it predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. To date, historians aren't sure why early humans built Göbekli Tepe. But many believe that its mere existence changes our popular understanding of human history, and suggests that organized religion came before the development of agriculture, instead of the other way around. Either way, Göbekli Tepe has more than earned its place in Revolutionary War heroes like George Washington or Paul Revere are well known. But a slave named James Armistead played a crucial, if overlooked, part in securing the American victory. During the war, Armistead was sent by the Marquis de Lafayette to infiltrate the British ranks as a spy. Since the British had offered American slaves freedom if they switched sides, no one questioned Armistead's presence. And no one guessed that Armistead could understand all the maps British soldiers left lying around, because they incorrectly assumed that a black man wouldn't be able to read. Slowly, Armistead fed intelligence to Lafayette and Washington. His insights helped them win the Battle of Yorktown, and the entire war. But after the Americans won their freedom, Armistead was denied his. It took petitions by both Armistead's owner and Lafayette himself for Armistead to finally be freed in 1787. On February 6, 1922, a Native American from Minnesota named Chief John Smith died, allegedly at the age of 137. To date, no one is sure exactly when Smith was born. He claims he was born in 1785. Other estimates, however, put his birthdate closer to 1825. Officially, the world's oldest person was a French woman named Jean-Louise Calment, who died at the age of 122 in 1997. But any list of weird history facts about the oldest people to ever live must wrestle with the disputed tale of John Smith. The men who landed on the moon, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, are famous. But what about the women who put them there? One NASA software engineer named Margaret Hamilton did all her work back on Earth. Painstakingly, Hamilton and her team wrote out all their code by hand. As she watched the astronauts land on the moon on July 20, 1969, Hamilton thought, "My God. Look what happened. We did it, it worked." However, to this day, she had never gotten the credit she deserves. In September 1964, the Beatles prepared to play at Gator Bowl in Florida. Beatlemania was in full swing, and the stadium had sold tickets for every one of its 32,000 seats. But when the Beatles learned that the stadium would be segregated, they threatened to pull out. "We never play to segregated audiences," John Lennon said, "and we aren't going to start now. I'd sooner lose our appearance money." The Beatles' tough stance led the concert producers to desegregate the Gator Bowl. And the Beatles had their contract amended to say they'd never play for a segregated audience. In 1887, a Kansas woman named Susanna Salter became active in the local temperance movement. This irked some men in the town of Argonia, so they decided they'd teach her a lesson. To humiliate Salter, they added her name to the mayoral ballot. But to the shock of everyone, Salter included, she won. Decades before American women won the right to vote, Salter served as the country's first ever female mayor. By the time he was 7 years old, German composing prodigy Ludwig van Beethoven had mounted his first concert. But by the time he turned 28, he started noticing problems with his hearing. And by the time he was in his 40s, he'd gone completely deaf. However, Beethoven came up with an ingenious solution that lands him in the upper echelons of any list of fun facts about history. By clenching a metal rod between his teeth and attaching it to his piano, he could make out faint vibrations. This allowed him to continue his spectacular career although his deafness persisted. When Beethoven premiered his stunning Ninth Symphony in 1824, he had to be turned around to see the audience cheering, as he could not hear their applause.